Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Pondering Skulls podcast. My name is Bree.
Hi, my name is Mo.
And we have a couple of Christmas stories from Reddit for you today, since Christmas is basically the next 2 days.
And for people who don't celebrate Christmas, you know what?
Just hope you enjoy the stories anyways.
Go away.
We hope you enjoy the stories anyways. We will see you at the end, and we hope you subscribe to the podcast on YouTube, and if you find us on Spotify or wherever else you find us at, just follow us there and leave a like or something.
And if you actually go to our video podcast, you will get a glimpse of me, Mo, in the background while she's reading, hanging out back here. It's like me in my natural habitat over here, just staring off into space.
And when she's reading, I hide, so. But anyways, enjoy the stories, and we will talk to you at the end. Thank you. Okay, so this first story comes from r/no sleep. It was posted by One Bitter Student, and it's called I Always Believed in Santa, Yet Now I Regret It. Lying beneath my feet is an impossibly small figure. Something about its shape sets my teeth on edge. Those pointed ears, now matted with blood, remind me of the elves from Christmas stories, but no elf was ever this grotesque. A deep dread settles in my stomach as its crimson blood seeps into the fibers of my carpet. It started with scratching sounds from downstairs. At first I dismissed it as the house settling, but then came the unmistakable rip of wrapping paper being torn. My first thought that was mice, or maybe a burglar? Grabbing the baseball bat I kept under my bed, I crept downstairs. Each step groaned beneath my weight, no matter how carefully I moved. The Christmas tree lights were still on, their multicolored glow casting strange shadows across the walls. At first I didn't see anything unusual, just the faint hum of the lights and the faint smell of pine. But then, beneath the tree, a figure moved. Small, hunched, and precise. It was rummaging through the presents with almost mechanical precision. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't a child. My heart thudded as I reached for the light switch. The overhead lights blazed on, and time seemed to freeze. The creature turned to face me, and I almost wished it hadn't. Its features were twisted parody of humanity. Bulging, oversized eyes dominated its face, and its grin stretched too wide, revealing teeth like shards of glass. For a moment we stared at each other, paralyzed in mutual horror. Then it moved. It screamed, a sound like nails dragging across the chalkboard, before leaping at me. Its teeth sank into my arm, a fiery burst of pain ripping through me. I swung the bat without thinking. The crack of impact was deafening, followed by a wet, sickening thud. I stumbled back, panting, staring at the crumbled body on the floor. My arm throbbed where it had bitten me, blood dripping onto the carpet. Oh God, I killed it. I killed something. But as I tried to process what had happened, the air shifted. The temperature dropped sharply, and every instinct screamed at me to run, to turn around. I didn't want to. I couldn't stop myself. Behind me, in the doorway, stood a man in a crimson suit. Massive and imposing, his form seemed to fill the entire room. His snowy beard couldn't hide the wide, gleeful smile stretching across his face. But this wasn't the Santa of childhood stories, no. The lights from the Christmas tree cast his shadow on the wall, but it didn't match his shape. The distorted silhouette loomed with spindly limbs and clawed hands, twitching in unnatural ways. I tried to run, but my feet slipped in the blood pooling on the floor. The bat clattered from my fingers as it fell. He laughed, the sound hollow and echoing, coming from everywhere and nowhere. Oh dear, he said, his voice like frost scraping against the glass. What a mess you've made. But don't worry, we never waste a potential helper. Before I could scream, his gloved hand clamped over my mouth, the other wrapping around my torso like a vice. He lifted me effortlessly as though I weighed nothing at all. His eyes glittered with an unnatural light, and a cruel warmth seeped into his smile. That's when the change began. It started with my bones. They cracked and splintered, then reformed with an audible pop. My limbs twisted, shrinking, contorting. Pain consumed me as my muscles tore apart and stitched themselves back together. My skin burned like it was being peeled away and replaced. I clawed at myself, trying to stop it, but my fingers, now impossibly small, scrabbled uselessly. But worse than the physical changes was the shift in my mind. Something alien took root, pushing me out, shoving my thoughts into a tiny, locked corner. Instincts I didn't recognize rose to the surface, a need to serve, to obey, to create toys, to prepare for next Christmas. I screamed in my head, but the sound couldn't escape. Finally, the transformation stopped. He set me down gently, brushing a gloved hand over my newly pointed ears. "Welcome to the family," he said warmly, his voice like bells and thunder. "We have so much work to do." I wanted to fight, to scream, to resist, but my new instincts overpowered me. They forced me to smile, a grotesque grin stretching far too wide across my face. "Yes, sir," I chirped, the words spilling out unbidden. As I followed him toward the chimney, my new feet leaving my bloody prints on the floor, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in a silver ornament. Staring back at me was a twisted little elf, its face split into an unnaturally cheerful grin. And behind me, the creature I had killed began to stir, its features slowly reverting to human. My shadow danced in the ornament's distorted surface, no longer my own.
So, this story is by Verlac_1, and it is called Elf on the Shelf. December in Ridgewood was always perfect. Lights on every house, wreaths on every door, and the faint smell of pine in the crisp winter air. I loved this time of year, and so did my family. We were unpacking decorations when Emma, my wife, pulled something from the bottom of the box. It was an old elf on the shelf. Its red felt clothes fading into its painted eyes stared up at her. "Where did this come from?" she asked, holding it up. "Maybe your mom put it in there?" I suggested with a shrug. "Just put it out. The kids will love it." Emma hesitated, but eventually placed the elf on the shelf on the mantel above the fireplace. Max and Lily, our kids, were thrilled. "What's his name?" "Jingles," Lily announced, clapping her hands. Emma gave a faint smile, though she looked uneasy. Later that evening, while we were settling down for the night, she grabbed her phone and read aloud. "There are rules for these things, you know." "Rules?" I asked. "Yeah, it's part of the Elf on the Shelf tradition. Kids aren't supposed to touch it or it loses its magic. Move the elf to a new spot every night. It's supposed to watch the kids and make sure they're behaving. It reports back to Santa." She shuddered. "It's kind of creepy if you think about it." I chuckled. "It's just a toy, Emma. Don't overthink it." But I couldn't deny there was something unsettling about it. Something about those painted eyes that felt too watchful. The first night, Emma woke up around 3 a.m. "I heard something," she whispered. I groaned. "It's probably nothing." But she insisted, so I followed her downstairs. The Christmas tree cast a warm glow over the living room. Everything looked normal except for Jingles. Emma froze. "Did you move him?" she asked. "No," I said, frowning. The elf was leaning forward on the mantel. I couldn't remember how Emma had positioned him, but she was certain he hadn't been like that. "The kids probably touched him," I said, trying to calm her down. But her unease lingered, and to be honest, something about the way Jingles' eye caught the light made my skin crawl too. At 2 a.m., on the second night, Max woke up screaming. I ran to his room, him right behind me. He was shaking, tears streaming down his face. "It was him!" Max sobbed, pointing to the corner of the room. Jingles, he was here. He was staring at me. I turned and saw the elf sitting on Max's dresser, his painted grin illuminated by the moonlight. Emma looked at me, her face pale. How did I get in here? She whispered. It's just the kids messing around, I said, though my voice had a hint of doubt. I grabbed Jingles and brought him back downstairs, tossing him onto the mantel. As I set him down, I swear I felt resistance, like his tiny arms clung to my fingers for a moment before letting go. I didn't tell Emma. She was already rattled enough. The next morning, Emma tried to convince me to leave. Something is wrong, Greg, she pleaded. We should go, at least for a few days. I almost agreed to keep the peace, but when I checked our bank account, I realized leaving wasn't an option. Christmas had drained us, and we didn't have the extra money for a hotel. We can't just leave the house, I said. We'd have to pack, and where would we even go? Emma pressed on. What about my sisters? You think the kids will want to leave all their decorations and presents behind? I countered. Plus, your sister isn't even really a huge fan of me, so I'd rather not spend Christmas constantly arguing with a brick wall. You're just stressed, Em. It's fine, I'll take care of it. She reluctantly dropped the subject, but the tension in the house was unbearable. At 3 a.m. on the third night, I woke up to Emma screaming. I ran into the kitchen and froze. Merry Christmas was scrawled across the walls in jagged crimson letters. At first, I thought it was paint, until I saw the bloody paw prints leading into the backyard. Snowball, our cat, lay in the snow, her neck twisted at an impossible angle. Emma collapsed into my arms, sobbing. I called the police, but they found nothing. No signs of break-in, no footprints other than ours. Absolute squat. It's probably just some sick prank, the officer said, though he looked me up and down with suspicious eyes. When we came back inside, Jingles was sitting on the kitchen counter. His head was tilted slightly, his smile wider than before. Greg, we need to leave. We can't, I replied, feeling the weight of it all. The cops are already suspicious. And what do we say? That doll is doing this? They'll think we're crazy. We'll figure this out. The power went out around midnight on the fourth night. I woke to the sound of faint, childlike giggles echoing through the house. Did you hear that? Emma whispered, clutching my arm. I grabbed a flashlight and crept downstairs, my pulse pounding in my ears. The beam of light swept across the living room and landed on a wall. Scrawled there in jagged letters was, "He sees you when you're sleeping." My stomach twisted. The couch cushions were slashed open, stuffing spilling onto the floor. Then I heard it, a soft, scuttling sound behind me. I spun around and froze. At the base of the stairs stood Jingles. He wasn't sitting anymore, he was standing. His painted eyes gleaming in the flashlight beam, and his grin, it wasn't like the harmless painted smile I remembered. It had stretched into a jagged, open maw, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. Emma screamed behind me. By the fifth night, I was at my breaking point. I begged Emma to take the kids and leave, but she wouldn't. We're not leaving you. We all leave or none of us do, she said. By 2 a.m., the screams started. I bolted to Lily's room and found her bed empty. The window was wide open, snow blowing in and covering the floor outside. Small footprints led into the woods. No, I whispered, panic clawing at my chest. No, no, no. I ran to Max's room. His bed was soaked in blood, the sheets a crimson mess. I staggered backward, bile rising in my throat. Why are you doing this? Emma screamed from behind me. I turned her. I turned to her, staring at the doorway. Jingle stood there. He wasn't the doll anymore. He was life-sized, his red suit darkening with blood. His painted eyes glinted with malice, and his mouth stretched wider than should have been possible. In one hand, he held a razor-sharp candy cane, the tip dripping with blood. He tilted his head, his painted face twisting into something alive and cruel. "'Tis the season," he whispered. I lunged at him, grabbing the fireplace poker and swinging with everything I had. The blow sent him flying into the wall. For a moment, I thought it was over, until I heard Emma screaming. I turned to see Jingle standing behind her, his twisted grin even wider. He raised the candy cane high, and I ran towards her, shouting, "No!" But it was too late. Her screams cut short as the light in her eyes faded. I dropped the poker, my hands trembling as Jingles turned towards me. And in the corner of the room, I noticed 2 new dolls. One with Max's brown hair, and one with Lily's blonde curls. I stumbled out of the house, tears streaming down my face, with the only sound being a high-pitched giggle echoing behind me. I don't know why Jingles came to our family. I don't know what purpose he came with. I just know that the last I saw Jingles was still in that house, and he was waiting for his next family.
This last story is from r/Stay Awake. It was posted by DJ_Storytime, and the thing is called Christmas Nightmare House. It was supposed to be a fun day visiting a Christmas village. Just the 5 of us, co-workers and the best of friends, out for a good time during the holidays. Maybe it would have been, but how were we supposed to know the festive house with all the lights and snow wasn't Santa's workshop? "Isn't this wonderful?" Clara, my wife, said as we entered the Christmas village. It really was. An open field just outside of town had been converted into a sprawling replica of the North Pole. The buildings were designed to look like quaint cottages and shops, complete with themes of toys and candy. Colored lights were draped everywhere, making the entire village sparkle and twinkle like a starburst of colors. Actors dressed up like Santa's helpers wandered about, playing roles, interacting with the customers, and hawking various souvenirs. There was even a petting zoo with reindeer and an actual sleigh with 9 reindeer hooked up, ready to take it on a tour through the town for one of the scheduled candy parades. Finally, there was Santa himself, sitting on a throne atop a hill surrounded by decorated pines and brightly wrapped packages, greeting people and taking pictures with them. How then could such a wonderful place harbor something so terrible as that house? Most of the day was wonderful. It was crisp Saturday, and we had been planning this outing as a group all week. It was a pure delight being part of the fun as my wife and friends excitedly toured the village. We did everything there was to do that day. We shopped in every store, we snacked in every restaurant and food stand, we played every game, we drank every warm, seasonal, boozy beverage there was. We pet the reindeer, we took pictures with Santa, we role-played with the actors, and generally goofed off. It was a magical day. And then we found the workshop. "What's that?" Joel asked curiously, pointing down a narrow, unused side street. "Let's find out," Carol said, laughing and smiling. "Whatever it is, I bet it's fun." We all cheerily went along with her suggestions, singing Christmas carols as we made our tipsy way to the mystery place. What we saw when we got there was the most magical thing we've seen all day. "They really went all out here," John excitedly exclaimed. "I can hardly believe it. They even got real little people to play the elves." I looked again. Sure enough, all of the actors playing the elves were unusually short. There couldn't have been one of them over 4 feet tall. They were busily working, rushing about like they were preparing for something big. Unreal, I said, and noticed my breath fog in front of me. Clarissa hugged her arms around herself. It's cold here. Why don't we go inside Santa's workshop? I bet it's fun. The workshop looked exactly as one might imagine Santa's workshop to be. Red, white, green, silver, and gold were the colors. The architecture looked very 15th century, giving it a quaint appearance. There were snowmen, small pine trees, and big candy canes scattered around the grounds. A warm light glowed inside, gently filtering out the windows, and a thick curl of white smoke rose from the chimney like a serpentine cloud. All of us were feeling cold. The crisp air seemed to be taking a sudden plunge, and it only made the warm, festive building all the more appealing. We happily agreed that it looked like fun and walked to it. The elves mostly seemed not to notice us as they rushed about their work, but I noticed one give us a stern look and shake of a head, and he rushed by. Something about him seemed off, and I couldn't quite put my finger on what. "Hurry!" John called as I paused to consider the strange behavior by this small man. I caught up as everyone reached the door. Joel opened it and held it open as we all filed in. Inside it was bright and warm, not painfully bright like an office with too much overhead lighting, but comfortably bright, like an open field on an early spring day. It smelled of sugar and baked goods. The entry was an open room, festively decorated with a reception and a door that led inside. Behind the desk was a small man dressed as an elf. He smiled at us and waved us over. "Before you enter the workshop, you need to sign the registry," he said in a cheerful tone. "What's inside?" Carol asked curiously, eyeing the door behind the shelf. The little man smiled widely. "It's a place like no other," he said brightly, "where the wonders never cease and everyone gets what they deserve." "Well, I deserve $1,000,000, Joel said with a laugh. "Let's sign this book and get on in there." We were all there for a good time. We've been having a good time, so how could we possibly know? How could we have any reason to expect that by signing that guest book, our wonderful day would become the stuff of nightmares? We happily signed our pages on the lines at the bottom of individual pages. Most of each page was covered in ornate calligraphy so fancy that none of us could actually read it. At the bottom was a heavy line with an X in front of it, indicating that it was where we should sign. The paper felt like old vellum, and the pen was a proper fountain pen that ink flowed out of in a dark line that varied in thickness with every stroke. Something wasn't sitting quite right in my mind. I couldn't put my finger on it. Just a general sense that all was not as it seemed. "What's this say?" I asked as I was signing my name. "Standard release," the elf said in a tone that indicated it didn't matter. "You know how these lawyers are, making everything into a liability." I laughed at this, as did my wife and John. Joelle gave Clarissa a mocking look of alarm, and she joined in the laughter. As soon as the last of us finished signing, the door opened and we could see inside. The ladies gasped, and the men's eyes grew wide in wonder. I wish I had the words to properly describe what we saw as we looked through that door, but it was everything any of us could have thought, hoped, and expected Santa's workshop to be. It was filled with toys, elves busily crafting them as they chattered cheerfully, laughed, and sang. That's when I noticed what had seemed off to me before. "Guys," I said hesitantly, "these dwarves are proportioned like a full-size person, just shorter." "Good for them," John said dismissively. "Now let's get in there and enjoy the best workshop setup I've ever seen." I didn't share my friend's lack of concern. Normally, a person with dwarfism is not proportionally to a full-sized person. Their heads are large compared to their bodies. Their limbs are short compared to their bodies too. These actors were more like pygmies. People who do not suffer from dwarfism, but are still extraordinarily short. It's incredibly rare, and there was no way this seasonal fair should have been able to find so many. The elves and the rest of the village are full-sized people. These are all pygmies, I said with concern. Something's... In we go, my wife interrupted as she pushed me through the door with everything else following. At first, everything was fine. At first, everything was exactly as it had seemed from the other room. That is, until a new figure entered the room. Look, Carol squealed with excitement. It's Santa! At first it seemed to be. In walked a large man dressed in an old-fashioned Santa outfit, green and brown, the kind he was best known for before the Coke Company popularized the red variant. He was a large man with a thick, long, white beard flowing out from under his hood. He carried a large sack over one shoulder, and in his other hand he held a shining scroll. His face was hidden in the shadow of his hood, with only his beard and the tip a long, pointed nose poking out. Welcome, he said in a deep, booming voice. It's time to check your signatures against the list and see if you're naughty or nice. Everyone but me oohed and awed in delight and anticipation. It was the nose. His nose wasn't right. Wasn't Santa's nose supposed to be like a button, not long and thin? I shook my head to clear the thought away. It's not the real Santa, I muttered under my breath. Get over it. I convinced myself that it was just the actor. I couldn't expect every Santa actor to look perfectly like the mythical version of Saint Nick, after all. It was a silly notion, an unreasonable expectation. And yet, this didn't feel like the fun fakery of the village outside. And just why was the biggest, most effortful, most important part of the whole Christmas package tucked away from something else, hidden down a narrow side street where anyone could miss it? Why wasn't it in the literal center of town? These thoughts raged through my skull, and I wanted to voice them, but I tamped them down and with the urge telling myself that I was just being silly, that this strange paranoia was unfounded with no relation to reality. Joel Donaldson, Santa announced in that booming voice. Yours is the first name signed. Time to see if you're naughty or nice. Joel stepped forward with a comical flourish. I noticed that his face was radiant with a blend of happiness and just a little bit too much alcohol consumed in our day of revels. I'm ready for my present, he announced with all the innocence and expectation of someone who truly thought that was right in the world. You will get your just reward, Santa declared somberly. He held up the scroll in front of him and let it unfurl. He read it aloud. Joel Donaldson, you are on the naughty list. Ooh, Joel said mockingly with a smile and a wave of his hand. The elves all stopped working and began to gather around us. They sang, naughty list, you are on the naughty list, over and over again as they surrounded Joel. Big, truly joyful smiles plastered across their smooth faces. Santa stepped aside, revealing a chair that had not been there before. Come, he commanded, receive your reward. The elves crowded in around Joel and began pushing him forward to their chair. Naughty list, you are on the naughty list, they continued to sing. Joel laughed and went along with it, believing that nothing was out of place, and it was all just part of the show. He walked past Santa and plopped himself down in the chair. That was the moment when the truth of our situation revealed itself. Heavy, spiked leather straps erupted out of the chair and wrapped themselves around Joel, trapping him and pinning him down. They squeezed and tightened around his legs and torso, and pinpricks of blood began to stain his clothing in slowly spreading circles of red. He screamed in surprise and pain. What are you doing to me? He yelled, pain cracking his voice as he thrashed his head and swatted futilely at the straps binding him to the chair. The elves laughed musically and began to chant, naughty list, the tone becoming increasingly menacing with every syllable. The floor opened up in front of Joel, and a large, ornate office desk stacked with papers and writing implements rose up before him. The elves' chanting ceased as Santa began to speak. "Joel Donaldson," he announced in a tone that was both businesslike and filled with malice. "You have been on the naughty boy. You have been stealing from your employer, using your position as an accountant to cook the books and move money from the business to your personal accounts." "I've done no such thing," Joel insisted. "Let me out of here. I swear to God I'm going to sue you into oblivion." The rest of us were stunned to say anything or do anything. What could we do? This was supposed to be a fun day. It was supposed to be safe and innocent, just 5 friends from work having a good time at the fair. We couldn't properly process this sudden turn of events, and we stood transfixed in horror as the scene unfolded before us. Santa laughed at Joel's futile threat. There was no merriment in it. It was a deep belly laugh, but it was filled with such malice that I hesitate to call it a laugh at all. But there is no better word to describe it. The straps tightened and moved, scraping across Joel like a sandpaper belt, shredding his clothes and the skin beneath. He thrashed and screamed in pain, and blood began to flow more freely. An elf walked up and placed an old quill pen in Joel's right hand before sliding a leather-bound ledger across the desk in front of him. Joel protested and dropped the pen. The straps tightened and raked him some more in response to his defiance, before the elf picked up the pen and put it back in his hand. "Your punishment is to find the errors and correct the balance in these books," Santa said with finality. "Every one of them is the result of a dishonest man lying and abusing his position to steal just like you. I know you're accustomed to different tools for your trade, but I'm afraid that you'll just have to complete this task with the old-fashioned way." "And if I refuse?" Joel said through teeth gritted in pain. The straps raked him again, and he screamed. Santa chuckled evilly. "If you refuse, the straps will punish you. If you make a mistake, the straps will punish you. And if you fall asleep, the straps will punish you. Make enough mistakes, and the straps won't stop. They will drag across your body and tighten until they have cut you to ribbons." "No!" Joel screeched as the chair slammed forward so hard that he would have slammed his head into it if his torso had not been tightly scraped to the chair, pinning him against the desk. "Naughty list, the elves sing again. You are on the naughty list." I watched as Joel reached forward with a shaking hand and took hold of the paper sitting atop one of the large piles. When he pulled his hand back, a bunch of papers fell to the desk, and the straps on the chair reacted, slicing across his body like a belt sander. Santa's booming laugh drowned out my friend's screams as the door to the next room opened. The 4 of us who were still free to move screamed in unison and ran back to the door we came in through, desperately trying to escape this nightmare version of Santa's workshop. It was sealed shut, refusing to open no matter how hard we pulled, pushed, or battered against it. The only response to our screams for help was the laughter of Santa, accompanied by the joyful singing of the elves as they continued their refrain of condemnation. "You must go forward," Santa demanded. "Go forward and receive your just reward." We continued our futile attempt to escape a while longer, but stopped when the elves crowded around us and began to push us toward the open doorway to the next room. "Just reward," they chanted. Joel screamed again as the wicked chair responded to some error he made, and I knew then that he was never meant to survive the task set before him, but to be slowly killed as he desperately tried to complete an impossible task. The 4 of us tumbled through the door and into the room next, to the sound of booming laughter over chants of "Just reward." The door slammed shut behind us as the lights came on, bathing us in a gentle glow while we desperately pounded at the closed door, screaming to be let out. The sound of many people talking stopped us, and we turned around in morbid curiosity to see what was going on. The room was filled with people stuffed into old-fashioned telephone booths. They were babbling nonsense into the receivers with pained looks on their faces. Once in a while, one of them would drop the phone in a coughing fit and spit up a great gout of blood before picking up the receiver again and babbling some more. A column of elves filed into the room from a hidden door. Wicked smiles plastered across their faces. They went about the room checking the phone booths, performing repairs, and washing out blood by connecting a hose to a nozzle on the outside of the phone booth that caused the water to spray right into the person's face at high volume, rinsing away the blood by sheer volume of water that drained out the bottom to God knows where. Booming laughter announced the arrival of Santa Claus as he approached us from behind the phone booths. "Carol Jenkins," his voice announced. "Time to see if you've been naughty or nice." He raised the hand with the scroll, but before he let it unfurl, I called out. "Wait," I pleaded. "What kind of Santa's workshop is this? Santa doesn't hurt people. The worst he does is give coal to naughty children." Looking back, I know it was a pointless question. Silly, even. Our captors were going to do what they intended with or without explanation. What did it matter if the man before us wasn't actually Santa Claus? Why would it matter anyway? There was supposed to be a fair with nothing but human actors. Humans don't follow Saint Nick rules. Only the truth was even worse than any of us imagined. The man dressed as Santa laughed. Not his usual booming laugh, but a low, menacing laugh. "Santa Claus?" he chuckled. "What makes you think I'm Santa Claus? Is it the robe?" He stood to his full height then, and he towered above us all. He pulled back his hood and grinned like a jack-o'-lantern. "Behold," he commanded in his booming voice, "I am Krampus, and I punish the wicked." We all stared in horror at the giant before us. His face was like gnarled wood, old and weathered, with hollow features, a long pointy nose, and deep, sharp eyes that seemed to look right through us. He dropped his bag and removed his gloves, revealing gnarled, knobby hands tipped with claw-like nails. The bag opened when it fell, revealing its contents to be nothing but stout reeds and human bones. "I am not here to reward the nice list," he continues. "I bear only the naughty list. If your name is on it, you will be properly rewarded for your behavior. It will be your just reward, and justice is harsh." Carol's eyes opened wide, and her mouth worked rapidly, trying to speak but failing to form any words. Krampus again lifted the scroll and let it unfurl. "Carol Jenkins," he announced, "you are on the naughty list." As he announced this, the elves in the room began to sing, naughty list, you are on the naughty list." They surged around her and pushed and carried her to Krampus as she screamed in terror. "You are a gossip," Krampus declared. "You spread rumors and falsehoods about others without regard for harm you're doing. You destroy people's names, reputations, and relationships with your wicked tongue." She struggled against the elves to no avail. As soon as she was close enough, Krampus reached out and snatched her up with one great gnarled hand and pulled her in close. "As punishment, you must confess the truth to every one of your victims," he said in a threatening tone. The floor next to them opened and a new phone booth rose up. Naughty list, the elves chanted. "But you won't be using that lying tongue," he continued. "A tool of deceit has no place in honest confession." Carol struggled in his grasp and started to scream for help, but Krampus shot his hand forward and shoved his fingers into her open mouth. Her mouth was forced open wider than it could naturally go, and her mouth tore open into a wide, jagged smile, and Krampus closed his fingers around her tongue. With a swift yank, he ripped her tongue out. Blood sprayed out of her mouth as she screamed in agony. Krampus dropped her tongue and held out his hand. A smiling elf ran forward and placed a small candy cane in it. He took the piece of candy and shoved it into Carol's mouth. The bleeding instantly stopped. It was no mercy, though, as Krampus immediately threw her into the phone booth and closed the door. "Call them," he commanded. "Once you confess your slander to all of your victims, you're free to go." Carol beat on the door, desperately trying to break free. It was pointless. She was as trapped as the rest of the people in that room. A door opened at the far end of the room. "Go," Krampus commanded, "and receive your just reward." The elves began to crowd around us again. They pushed and prodded us in the direction of the door. We reluctantly went. My wife broke down crying. Tears streamed down her face as she sobbed in great shuddering gasps. John yelled in protest about how they couldn't do this to us. I was silent. None of it mattered anyways. We were trapped, well and truly, and no amount of protest, no flood of cheers, would change it. We neared the door and were roughly shoved the last few steps. The door slammed shut as soon as we were through, leaving us enveloped in darkness. We waited in silence for a few moments. The darkness was oppressive, and my anxiety climbed with every second. It could be hiding literally anything, and based on the horrors of the last 2 rooms, that anything was certain to be deeply disturbing at best, and outright horrifying at worst. "Hello?" I called out to the darkness in a shuddering breath. As if in response, there was a slow grinding sound as part of the wall dropped down, revealing a roaring fireplace. The inferno lit the room in a dancing, ominous glow. It might have been a comforting glow under other circumstances, but after the previous 2 rooms, there was nothing it could be but a sign of foreboding. In the center of the room was a large wrought iron framed bed with chains at the head and foot. In place of a mattress was an iron slab. Beyond that, the room lay barren, empty of all signs of life or habitation. The fire blazed even higher and belched out into the room, licking the bed frame for just a moment like the tongue of some arcane hungry beast. As the fire retreated, a now familiar, horrifying figure stepped out of the flames, followed by an entourage of those despicable elves. Without any further fanfare, Krampus held out his scroll and dropped the bottom roll. "John Valentine," he announced in that booming voice. "You are on the naughty list." The elves were on him in an instant, singing that horrible chant. Naughty list, you are on the naughty list." As they grabbed him and lifted him overhead, kicking and screaming, it was futile. Small as they were, the elf's grip was like iron, and all John could accomplish was wrenching his own back and shoulders painfully as they proceeded to the bed. The elves chained him to the bed. Iron manacles looked tight around his wrists and ankles. Then they pulled the chains taut and to splay him out and immobilize him. He screamed in pain and terror as his shoulders and hips were dislocated with a series of loud pops. "You are guilty of adultery many, many times," Krampus announced with a malicious glee. "You lied to cover it up. You betrayed someone close to you, exploited his trust, and smiled as you deceived a friend." John was screaming in protest. "It's not like that," he protested. "We're in love. You can't blame me for being in love. Love is a beautiful thing." Krampus laughed wickedly. "You continue to lie even as you face just punishment for your crimes," he declared with absolute authority. "You never loved her. You had other women even as you took what didn't belong to you over and over and over again." I was stunned. The John I knew would never do something so heinous. He was a good, upright man, and the only one I completely trusted. I turned to my wife in shock. "Who did he—" My words caught my throat as I saw my wife, my dear Clarissa, crying. Her mouth quivering with great sobs and tears flowing like twin rivers from her bright green eyes. Her head hung in shame. "He said he loved me," she sobbed. "He promised that he would make everything better and all my problems would go away if I chose to be with him," she sobbed. She looked at me with profound sadness and regret. "It was me," she confessed. "I'm so sorry, it was me. The happiness I felt in our marriage wasn't there anymore, and he promised to make me happy again. Her words hit me like a bullet to the heart. My wife and my best friend, the two people in the world dearest to me who I trusted with my life, betrayed me together? I felt my own tears begin to well up and pour out of my eyes. Why? I croaked, unable to think of anything else to say. I still love you, she said with sincerity. I always loved you, that never changed, but the magic was gone. I stopped being happy at the thought of you. The sweet things you do lost their magic and became routine. I wanted that happiness back. I craved the intensity of it, and he gave it to me, that's all. Her words were like a punch to the gut by a champion heavyweight boxer. I was stunned, breathless, and unable to form a coherent thought. Clarissa Hart, Krampus announced as if he had been waiting for this exact moment to speak. You were on the naughty list. The elves crowded around my wife. Naughty list, you are on the naughty list. They chanted gleefully as they grabbed her, lifted her up, and began to march toward the bed. No, I screamed. I forgive her. I don't care what she did. We'll work it out. We'll find our happiness again. Don't take her from me. I love her. The only response I got to my pleas was a continued chant of, naughty list, you are on the naughty list, as these demonic elves joyfully carried my wife, kicking and screaming apologies and professions of her love for me, to the iron bed. You are also guilty of adultery, lying, and betrayal of the one person who loved and trusted you above all others, he declared. Your crimes were committed with the condemned man, therefore you shall share his fate, just as you shared your own marriage bed with him. The elves shackled and stretched her exactly as they had to John. I turned away as she screamed in pain and terror, every pop of her joints sending a shudder of sorrow and regret through my body. You must witness this, Krampus said to me in an almost sympathetic voice. She would have left you anyway, only to get her heart broken in betrayal. She cared far less for you than she did for her own selfish desires. I turned back to face the bed and lifted my head. All I could see through the haze of tears was blurry vision of a black lump of iron with 2 patches of color on top. I heard the sound of metal grating and sliding as floor plates moved, opening a blazing pathway from the fireplace to the bed, one panel at a time. My wife and my best friend screamed even louder and began to thrash, desperation overriding the pain in their dislocated limbs as they realized what was going to happen. Over it all, I could hear the booming sound of Krampus's voice as he declared, Your bodies will burn together just as you burned with lust together. The elves surrounded me and carried me bodily across the room to a newly opened door. They dumped me through it, and it slid shut just as I heard the screams of 2 people I loved best intensify as the flames reached the underside of the bed and began to heat the iron slab they lay upon. I lay in a crumpled heap for I don't know how long, sobbing with intense sorrow at that loss. My friends, my wife, all gone, victims of a demonic entity meting out a twisted and final justice that nothing in me could reconcile as right or proper. We all fall short. We all make mistakes. And none of us is truly innocent in this world. It's only a matter of degree and amount. Eventually, I opened my eyes, stood up, and looked around. I was in a cozy sitting room. There was a perfectly ordinary fireplace with a non-threatening fur cheerily popping away. There was a table set with a fine feast. There was a long, overstuffed couch. The room was festively decorated with all the trimmings of a proper Christmas celebration. And in a very large chair sat the demon Krampus, patiently waiting for me to notice him. Take a seat, he said gently, motioning to the couch with one large bony hand. Seeing no other course of action, I obeyed. You are not on the naughty list, he declared with a soft authority, the wickedly mirthful, blooming voice somehow absent. What? I replied dumbly, my mind not comprehending what I had just heard after seeing my wife and friends sentenced to torment and death. You are not fully innocent, Krampus explained, but minor infractions do not condemn a man. Therefore you are not on the naughty list. I sat there in stunned silence, expecting it to be some sort of malicious joke at my expense. I expected those horrible elves to show and start chanting about me being on the naughty list as they dragged me off to be tortured and killed. It didn't happen. Why? I croaked after I finally found my voice. You think me a demon, Krampus stated. That's understandable, but I'm not. I don't understand, I said in soft confusion. Krampus nodded his head. And you never truly will, he replied. All you need to know is that I am tasked with rewarding people for evil acts they commit. Not evil by any human understanding, but according to a universal truth that many deny even exists. What even is that? I asked softly. The universe operates under certain rules, Krampus explained. Good and evil exist because of those rules. Good is whatever follows the rules, and evil is whatever breaks them. The catch is that your kind is bound to break them. The only question is which rules you break and how often. I don't know why, but something about being told that good and evil are universal and unchanging, that humanity has no say in the matter, incensed me. That doesn't give you the right to just murder people, I shouted, all of my pain, sadness, and rage coming out in a single exhausting burst. I slumped back in my chair, completely spent, suddenly helpless and uncaring. Just kill me and get it over with, I sighed. Stop toying with me. Krampus chuckled, a real one, like he genuinely found me funny. I'm not going to kill you, he declared with finality. You are not on the naughty list. Instead, I'm going to give you a gift. I didn't have time to ask what he meant by gift before he was on me. He grabbed a hold of the front of my shirt with one mighty hand and lifted me up. Then his free hand, he pulled back his hood to reveal that among his other horrifying features, he had horns like a goat and this scraggly hair that seemed to flow and move of its own volition. He opened his mouth, and it stretched wider than any mortal man's mouth ever could, so wide that I thought he meant to eat me in a single gulp. Then he breathed. He breathed on me, a deep, sighing breath that seemed to have no end. I reeked of carrion rot, smothered with mint and cloves. I tried to hold my breath to avoid breathing the foul fumes, but it wasn't long before I found myself taking in a great gasp of air as my body overrode my mind and forced me to breathe whether I wanted to or not. At first I felt nothing other than simple revulsion. I gagged on the foul breath and coughed like my lungs wanted to jump out of my mouth. Then it subsided, and I found myself inhaling. I inhaled like never before, seeming to have no limit to how much air I could take in. I inhaled until every last foul fume that Krampus emitted was sucked in, and then he dropped me to the floor. I lay there coughing and sputtering as though my body were now rejecting the clean air now that Krampus had finished fumigating me. Krampus stood looming over me like a specter of death himself until I settled down and stood again on my own 2 feet. I looked up and saw his hood drawn forward yet again, like it had been when I first laid eyes upon him. His eyes glowed like embers in the darkness. He said nothing, waiting as if in anticipation. "What now?" I asked, coughing as I spoke. A door that I had not noticed before opened up to reveal a familiar snowy landscape. "Now you go out into the world and see it for what it truly is," he said in a voice that grew deeper and more foreboding with every word. "That is your gift. You will always know the truth about the people you meet. Never again will you be deceived." I started to speak up, to ask what he meant by his statement, but he hushed me and pointed me to the door. "Go," he commanded in that voice, booming, and I had to come to know in dread. "Leave my workshop and never return." I turned and walked out the door and into the Christmas village. All was as it had been before we entered that wicked workshop. People were blissfully ignoring the fair in the cold winter air. A recent layer of snow coated the land with a cozy frozen blanket. I turned around and the workshop was gone. Where it had once stood was a town center filled with bustling shops and Christmas-themed carnival games. A drink vendor was off to one, calling for people to come and enjoy hot spiced mead and mulled wine to warm their bodies on a cold winter day. I needed a drink, and I hurried over to the vendor, fully intending to order a hot mug of mulled wine when I noticed something that stopped me in my tracks. I did a double take, looking at the man in stunned disbelief. I couldn't properly explain it, but as plainly as though it were written all over his face, I knew things about the man that I had no logical way to know. I knew beyond all doubt that this was a con man. I knew that he served cheap drinks that he labeled as expensive premium ones. I knew that he was a habitual liar who lacked an honest bone in his body. I knew that he sweet-talked many gullible young women into his bed for his own amusement, with false promises and declaration of affection before moving on to a new town where he did it all again. I knew that he had murdered his own mother and made it look like a falling accident so he could collect her life insurance before the term expired. I knew about the vial of oleander toxin he kept hidden in his inside pocket of his coat so he could poison the occasional drunk, knowing it would look like a heart attack and the coroner would likely not look any deeper. "What can I get for you?" the man said cheerfully, a wide smile splayed across his face. "Do you have anything stronger than wine?" I asked, suddenly wanting nothing to do with anything this man touched. He pointed behind me to a small building simply marked "Bar." "Go there if you want liquor," he said with the same cheer and smile he'd originally had. I thanked him and left, heading to the bar at first, then turning down the street and leaving, wanting nothing more than to put as much distance between myself and the Christmas village as humanly possible. Alright everyone, we hope you enjoyed the stories tonight and their Christmas creepy sounds and stuff.
Yeah. In her last story, which she did, you might have heard a little clanking, unless she, kind of edited that out.
I didn't.
You
It's
didn't?
still in there.
Yeah.
So there's like a loud thud that you hear.
It's back there. She has like a metal roller, and that's what you heard.
Yeah, so it's not literally a monster in my house or this one moving thing.
I was back there hanging out.
But anyways, we hope you enjoyed these stories, and please subscribe to our podcast, and we will see you next time. Have a Merry Christmas!
Merry Christmas!